Thank you, everybody. Welcome to Insights Unplugged. We're very excited to have you here today, and most excited about our speakers today and the information and the knowledge and just the insights that they might be able to share with you today. So welcome, everybody. Gilbert Salinas is the recently appointed Executive Director and CEO of the Greater Brownsville Incentive Corporation, or Greater Brownsville now it's called, where he plays a pivotal role in shaping the economic landscape of Brownsville, Texas. He previously led economic development efforts at JIVIC, successfully recruiting education, exploration technology, SpaceX, to what is now the Starbase Spaceport at Boca Chica. After serving as Executive Director of the Kerr Economic Development Corporation in Kerrville, Texas, Gilbert returns to JIVIC, bringing with him a wealth of experience and renewed vision for the region's growth. Welcome, Gilbert.
Thank you. It's my honor to introduce our second speaker, Mr. Walt Ugalde. Walt is an economic development and industry outreach executive for NASA's Technology Transfer and Commercialization Program. Based out of Johnson Space Center in Houston, Walt works with businesses, startups, co-founders, and investors to help them leverage NASA-developed technology and commercialization into proven products and services, as well as mapping industry capabilities back into NASA's main mission. Walt's experience in fostering public-private collaborations has led to agreements across various departments of defense, innovation initiatives, and programs. And Walt is actively engaging with academia and was also a founding member of the University of Houston Clear Lake Cybersecurity Initiative. Give it up for Mr. Walt Ugalde. Now, we're going to be asking them a few questions, but this conversation is going to be very fluid. And we're going to have them talk for about 40 minutes before we actually allow the audience to ask a few questions itself. But today's a really exciting day because in about 3 hours, we're going to see yet again another launch just from here from Brownsville's Boca Chica Beach of Starship. So the question, and this is the first question for both of you, how do you envision the space industry evolving over the next decade? And more specifically, are there any lessons from other aerospace hubs that Brownsville could potentially learn from in terms of economic and innovation potential?
Do you want to take that one first?
So let me take a step back. 2011, I guess that's 13, 14 years ago, when we first started working this project in my prior capacity, which was the Brownsville Economic Development Council, we met, we got a call from the governor's office that they had this project, this company that was looking to build rockets on the commercial side, which was unheard of because back then it was NASA. NASA was the only entity in the United States that launched rockets into space. So it was a private company, mind you, a startup, that was looking to both manufacture and launch rockets into space, and they were looking at 4 states, and that was Florida, Georgia, Puerto Rico, and then Texas. And not just Texas, but the southern tip of Texas. So we met with we were with the governor's office. They gave us a lead the next day, make the phone call, and within 2 weeks, we're already meeting with the company, and we're meeting with the founder of the company, which turned out to be Space Exploration Technologies and Elon Musk himself. And obviously, this was Elon before the Elon that we know today, right? And he painted the vision and started talking about building rockets and why a place like Brownsville, Texas, Boca Chica Beach, and I'm going to use his term, was, quote, intriguing to him. And at that point, for this project, everything pointed to Florida. But then we're looking at, okay, we got it. He gave us almost 2 hours of his time and talked about the project. It was almost kind of like a pitch, just kind of like, here's what we're doing, here's what we're trying to do, and here's why it makes sense. And then somewhere along the lines, he asked us, do you know why we're doing this? And I'm like, okay, well, it's kind of like you're taking payloads into space. You're kind of like a logistics company, like a FedEx, UPS, except you're going to space, right? So there's money to be made in that. And that's when he kind of paused and said, humanity can no longer sustain itself on this planet. So I'm going to colonize Mars And the way we're going to do that is by building rockets and launching them into space, destined for Mars. And Boca Chica Beach could maybe be the place that we do that. So this is 2011. I mean, this is, we're still in the middle of a major economic downturn. The space shuttle was still flying. And when it came to cutting edge, forward thinking, global ideas, everybody was on the edge of their seats waiting for Steve Jobs to tell us what that was. He was still alive. So we're there and we're like, okay. And then we're thinking, how are we going to make this project happen? He just told us a why, but now us, here we are, Brownsville, Texas, back then, the poorest community in the United States. How are we going to be able to convince our leadership that this is a project that we should put our hard-earned, tax dollars to play to incentivize a company at the time to come into our community and do what he just said? How are we going to convince the local population, the local people that, we're going to do this because we're going to colonize Mars? That was the vision back then. But we're living that today. Fast forward to today, that's exactly what they're doing at Boca Chica Beach. They're building rockets that are destined for Mars, and how nice that it's actually happened today. So now, the questions that we're asking ourselves in our office is not, we're not talking about the space vehicle, the satellites, the infrastructure that's needed to get a spaceship to Mars. That conversation was already had. Today, the conversation we're having, as far as the space industry, the commercial side, space sector, is thinking forward is, how is Mars going to get colonized now? So you think about it. I mean, getting there is one thing. Getting there is what's being done today. But once you get there, what are you going to need? Well, you need tools, you need food, you need construction materials to start building a city out there. You watch that movie, The Martian. The Martian came out several years after our first initial visit with Elon. It's all the above. Everything that we have on this planet, how are we going to get that to Mars? So that's the conversations that are being had today for 10 years out. So that's forward thinking. That's what we're doing. We already have the company, the operation that's building the rockets to get us there. Now is the how on another planet. Nathan, does that answer your question?
It does. I guess the second pivot to that is what other aerospace hubs can we learn from in which those industries are taking place to further expand Brownsville or the Rio Grande Valley's opportunity or potential?
What we did back then was looking at what Houston, Cape Canaveral, and to a certain extent what LA was doing then. Today, we're looking at other cities around the world. You've got Shanghai, you got Berlin that are really starting to look at that. I'd like to say Russia, but we just can't get eyes on that, right? So what are some of the other cities that are doing for us to be able to keep up with that as well? Because back then, we're looking at the top 3 cities in the US that actually have rocket manufacturing and launch rockets. There's a 4th city, that's Alaska, but that's for polar orbits launches, which are very different than what's being done here.
And Walt, on that question, Gilberto had mentioned how a lot of things changed in 2011. And for NASA, a lot of things have changed really since 2000, 2005. And we hear a lot in the media that, SpaceX is going to destroy NASA, or NASA doesn't need to exist. Could you kind of talk to that, and also what changes started early on, maybe even 3 administrations ago to now?
Sure. So first of all, the forward-leaning vision that the city of Brownsville and Gilberto had back in 2011 is just outstanding. To be able to pull that off and then have the stick-to-itiveness to kind of grind through that process, especially understanding at the time the region was kind of a little fish in a big sea of competition is just incredible. I'll go back. What you're going to see today at 4 p.m. is a culmination of 20 years of strategic, intentional planning on the NASA side. If you remember in 2003 and 2004, we had the Columbia shuttle disaster during the Bush administration. At that time, there was an Aldrich Commission that came in. We had to decide what we were going to do with the space shuttle program. We decided we were going to end it in 2011. And what was going to come after that was what we call the third iteration of human exploration, a third business model, if you will, that would fully leverage public-private ventures, right? So at Will Stop, right around the time, 2011, 2012 timeframe, when all the momentum was happening here in Brownsville, we put $1.3 billion into our commercial crew program. And that kind of lit the venture fund, if you will, that enabled this third business model pivot, right? And SpaceX got a large chunk of that, and they're one of our more successful commercial providers. So we went into this knowing that we needed to innovate faster. We knew industry had capability that we didn't have, just in terms of, I'll call it innovation neurons, if you will, leveraging the crowd. We knew in order to do the things that we wanted to do on Mars and on the moon, that the technologies hadn't been invented yet. We knew trying to do that behind our fence line was just not going to happen. And we knew we needed to leverage a lot of smart people out there, smart people in communities, people who traditionally wouldn't have voices, who could come in through different innovation hubs, venture hubs, different funding programs in order to kind of put their ideas out there with a lot of our forward-leaning platforms. So we intentionally wanted to divest ourselves out of low Earth orbit and out of the things that we thought industry could do based on us pushing a lot of our technology out to the market. And when I say technology, I'm also talking about what I'll call intellectual capacity and intellectual infrastructure. From an urban planning and economic development standpoint, a lot of folks talk about workforce development. I talk about that in terms of almost like when you're building your electrical infrastructure. I want to have intellectual infrastructure, right? I want to have innovation infrastructure. I want to be able to do all these, leverage all those different tools that maybe were not traditional components of a large federal organization. So we've begun to reach out to different regions. South Texas is one of them. San Antonio through the AFRL, they're tied into the Hyperspace Challenge. The Space Valley Corridor, which basically goes El Paso, Las Cruces, into Albuquerque, and then into Colorado Springs and Denver, and on that whole thing, and then out in Honolulu with AFRL. So a lot of those components feed into what we're doing from a Fed standpoint. There's a lot of crossover supply chain elements that have been enabled that everybody can leverage now, not just NASA space, but commercial space and other Feds. So we recognized at a really early stage that we had to do business differently. And to hear a federal organization, if you had been part of it, to have a federal organization literally disrupt itself and then enable this whole other way of doing business is completely unheard of. And when you get into change management components, a lot of folks say, hey, we want to have that creative tension, right? But that creative tension comes in the form of heated arguments, what we call scrimmages, right? And some people are stuck to legacy thinking. Some folks can really embrace the forward vision and just use like an entrepreneurship mindset and just go and make it happen instead of always waiting for things to be proven out. If we had waited to see if Elon could do what he could do, you know, we wouldn't be here. He's one of those guys who's like, I got an idea, let's make it happen. Gilbert at the time, it's like, you know what? Yeah, let's swing big. You know, if we're going to do this, let's dream big, let's make it happen. And the ripple effects are just outstanding, right, at every level. So we have leveraged the networks. We created intentional innovation nodes, not only nationally, internationally, but but also at the local level, right? So like a group like eBridge, a group like Expanding Frontiers, UTRGV, right? All those elements, TSC, all of those components become part of this massive ecosystem that we leverage. So hopefully that answers it. But it's awesome to see, you know, we had talked about in 2004, there's a group of us, we were called the Disruptors, and our office was called the Island of Misfit Toys, if you've ever seen the Christmas story. But we were coming up with these ideas, and we're like, why not, right? There was a bunch of us that were not engineers. I'm not an engineer. I'm a marketing guy by trade and an urban planner. And so we kind of knew. It's like, yeah, this very well could happen. We've got a lot of smart people on the street. There's a lot of tech out there. The regions are getting organized. They're leveraging state funding. They're leveraging EDA grants. They're leveraging all this stuff. So yeah, it absolutely can happen. And it certainly did here.
You know, Walt, all that, I'm sorry, you
Go ahead,
ask a
go ahead.
question? May I or no? Yes?
No, go for it.
Yeah.
You know, Walt, I'll add, and I think you'll agree with this, but without you being part of that team of those great disruptors, and I do not speak on behalf of SpaceX. I do not work for SpaceX. I work for my community, which is Brownsville, Texas, from the perspective of an economic developer. But without you being that great, that disruptor who created that great disruption within NASA, there's a possibility SpaceX doesn't happen here. So you're one of the ones within NASA that started that process, whether you knew it or not.
Right.
Because with that disruption came the opportunity for an entity, in this case was SpaceX, to do the great acceleration.
Correct.
And accelerate everything, which is where we're at today.
Right. Yeah, and great organizations that are willing to disrupt themselves or move forward from a traditional cash cow perspective, you know, traditional industries. It literally becomes a lesson in industrial psychology and human behavior, right? The team that you have, you know, how comfortable are people with change? How comfortable are they with getting their theories questioned? How comfortable are they literally throwing the wild idea, you know, the wet spaghetti noodle against the wall, see what sticks, and then who's willing to kind of fund it, right? So, hey, let's see what happens, right? We've got folks in this room that are excellent at doing that. Dr. Rick Janae, I work across the U.S., a lot of innovation hubs, and I can honestly say that his ability to kind of do that in this region is take someone who really doesn't have a background and just kind of stick it out, you know, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. Year 4, it kind of happens. It's rare. A lot of people want to have that quick hit, and then they quit. But it's one of the reasons why I like this region so much is one, just from a culture perspective, right? There's a we, right? We grew up in families. It's a we and not a me. We've been told no so many times that the word no is just like, whatever. I'm just going to keep going, right? We've got grit, and we've got the uniqueness, and I'm really excited for this region to see how it grows, and I know we'll continue to stay connected very well into the future through the space programs.
Thank you for that answer. And I mean, we know about disruption. Look at this project called eBridge.
Right.
We never thought we were going to get there, and we did. With that, talking about the power of partnerships, you know, and disruption kind of brings partnerships together. We'll start with you, Gilbert. How do you see public-private partnerships influencing the trajectory of the space industry? And what role can regions like Brownsville play in this development?
Yeah, I think I just mentioned that here. It's you know, that partnership between SpaceX and NASA. It's that great acceleration is happening because of the public-private partnership. We recognized that way back when, when we first met with them, and the SpaceX mentioning, space shuttle's no longer flying, there's an opportunity there, and this is what we're planning to do. And that was not the only company at the time that was also looking at our area. There was 2 other space companies that were looking. SpaceX just happened to be a lot further along, and those other 2 companies were also looking at partnerships with NASA. So that was very forward thinking at the time, with that public-private partnership, with the EDC, with the city itself, the county. Today, it's They're already here, but there's some other companies out that are looking as well. And not necessarily in the space sector, but in the aerospace, which, by the way, there is a difference, and I learned this the hard way,
Right.
between aerospace and space. You know, and I was told early on, you know, in aerospace, they're still within the air. Space, we get through the air to get into space. So I was kind of like,
Right.
don't ever refer to us as aerospace. So we're getting a lot of activity in the aerospace sector, again, because of what happened with SpaceX coming into play, and those are the public-private partnerships that we're talking about. Now, coming back to what you said, Walt, where there's an opportunity, it's a deviation of a public partnership, but human capital and infrastructure. I can't stress that enough, how today that's becoming extremely important to support what they're doing and to support the other companies that are following suit as well. So that's an extension of a public-private partnership that we're currently working on, and which this facility, the eBridge, congratulations to Corey of BCIC, Linda and your team with eBridge, because this is becoming a very integral part of what they're looking for.
Well, on that,
Yeah, repeat the question one more time. So
just how do you see public-private partnerships
Got it.
influencing the trajectory of the space
So
industry?
I will say the short answer, they're going to grow, and the nation's space infrastructure and nation's space program is going to be dependent on it, right, from a sustainability standpoint. The partnerships will occur at various levels, right? So the first form of partnership, I'll call it the academic side of the equation, working with institutions, the STEM side of the equation, getting kids excited about engineering and math, letting folks that traditionally wouldn't even think of a career in engineering, that they can actually do it, right? Then you got the high schoolers and the college folks, right? We've got a couple of programs, a Hunch program out of the International Space Station, I think, is working with the local school here. We've got our NASA T2U program where we're trying to work with TSC. We've got our T2X program working with Expanding Frontiers to teach entrepreneurship, right? And the goal there is if we can help create companies in this region using NASA programs, great. But outside of that, if you think about someone going through the entrepreneurship process, it's a lean canvas model of these 9 modules. What it teaches you is how to problem solve, how to do critical thinking. And that is a translational component that these students at a very young age, whether they become entrepreneurs or not, will take with them, right? It's a way of thinking that is just kind of non-traditional, but it's critical now, what we're seeing. And this region really embraces it really well. It's awesome. The stuff that comes out of the students is just incredible. The next layer is partnering with state components, right? So, and even kind of, so folks, I don't know if you've heard about the Texas Space Commission that recently just got propped up by Governor Abbott. There's a group called TARSEC, Texas Aerospace Research Space Economy Consortium, right? And it's a group where the state is asking all the regions to input what they need from a space standpoint. Governor Abbott has asked all the universities in the region to come up with a space degree, either a bachelorette or an accelerated program. And then there's a funding arm called CRF, right? So there's a way to network into the state side of the equation. Then at the federal level, NASA has programs in our early stage innovation and partnership portfolio, such as the traditional SBIR, Small Business Innovative Research, which has funds out there, the tech transfer. We have game-changing technology development. We have space technology research grants for universities, right? So that's a third. The fourth one is international. And this is one that I'm excited, and I have my grand idea for this group. And this is not a NASA thing. This is a Walt, right? Who's just this, marketing guy that non-NASA kind of background before coming to NASA is there are 7, so we have the Artemis Accords, and it's all the different countries that have signed on to these accords that agree to work with us to go to the moon and to the Mars, right? So not only do we have government space flight, we've got commercial space flight, we've got international components. There are 7 countries on the Artemis Accords from South and Latin America, right, that are part of this moon thing. And if you think about what Elon is building for us, which is the Starship HLS, human landing system, right, which will be our Artemis 3 launch, They're going to need payloads, right? These international partners are going to be there. The common core language of these groups is Spanish, right? If I throw the noodle against the wall, it's like, why don't I make a United Nations of Spanish-speaking spacefaring countries right here in Brownsville? I build this infrastructure. Then when we're doing these FAM tours and having these adjacent markets with these businesses coming in, right, we can seed fund this, and you're leveraging an asset. So the international piece is a big piece too, and I think there is a play for this region to make, right? And there's what 2 years ago, I coined the term the South Texas Economic Diamond, right? And pitched that as I go around, and I think the folks at Greater San Antonio kind of grabbed it and started running with it. But part of that was understanding what the infrastructure is here, human capital, all the different components, and finding a way to leverage that. So those 4 areas, right? And then I would say also just peer-to-peer, right? On the VC world, business people working together, talking, trying to find opportunities, understand that, yes, you can be in competition with each other, either businesses here or the different regions, but it needs to be or come in a form of what I call competitive cooperation, right? So if we all kind of work together, we can have our own little niches and sectors, but if we all work together, we all eat, right? And so from that standpoint, I think those are where the partnering components come in, and I think our business model will certainly pivot even more to that.
Sorry, Nathan. So how, talking about, that kind of infrastructure, how do you both see the role of, because we have a pretty, well-defined maquila industry on the other side of the border and this side of the border. How do you see this industry, even though they're working in their own industries, to support their partnerships, and how important is that leveraging that side of industry, the manufacturing industry, to support the space sector here in Brownsville and beyond? Those partnerships are extremely important because of nearshoring and all these words that we're hearing nowadays. How do you see that relationship building to better serve the needs of what is coming in to the Brownsville in terms of the space sector?
I think that's it.
Yeah, so both nearshoring and reshoring, that started administration and a half ago, and now it's almost like on steroids. So that's the world that we live in today. So for the next, and it didn't matter who was going to come into this, this next presidential election, that nearshoring, reshoring trend, those wheels were already turning. It was already set in motion. So that's just going to help our industrial base grow. And if you look at most space centers, they tend to be in areas that have an industrial cluster of some sort. We just happen to have that here already. So that helps with supply chain and logistics. Our port infrastructure has also become proven to be key to the operations out there. And then the other one, as Walt said, is human capital. So we already have that infrastructure somewhat getting there as far as and I love what you said, Walt, about people being able to build things with their hands. That's what Brownsville's about. I mean, that is the skill set that we have. We've learned to be scrappy for so long, right? Being able to work with what we have, and we use our hands. Well, guess what? That's exactly what a SpaceX needs. Obviously they need the engineers and everything, but they need them to also learn how to build stuff with their hands. So yeah, with those effects and looking at geopolitics, how that's really starting to put this place on the map, in addition to what SpaceX did, it dovetails nicely into that particular sector.
Yeah, I would agree. I can't speak to the geopolitics. I've got to be agnostic on that point, but I do want to emphasize what Gilberto said about the supply chain networks, right? Having deep verticals in regions that allow you to build strong adjacent markets, right? So that you've got a really diverse supply chain base, I think is important, and it's what attracts other industries into the region. And so I think it's one of the competitive advantages of this region, right? And finding out how to thread it all together and view it in terms of who your customers are. So I'll talk like just kind of high-tech industry, right? So I used to do FAM tours when I was in San Antonio. And one of the things that we had to pivot our brains around was what was our perception of them perceiving us versus what their perspective was, right? And I think last time I was in town, I talked about, I think this is with the CoStep folks, that most folks view outside of the Rio Grande Valley as one big metropolitan statistical area. So when companies come in, they're kind of looking at the broader thing. I did an exercise where I took a map of the Rio Grande Valley, all the way from North Valley down to South Valley, laid it over Houston, and it was the same size, right? So your customer's perspective on things isn't always necessarily your perception of how you're viewed, but I think it kind of threads into that supply chain component, right? When you build that broad base now, and we go into that everybody gets to eat kind of thing, right? A healthy region, healthy industrial organizations. All of a sudden, your sales pitches get easier and easier, right? Yeah.
Gilberto, you kind of touched on this, and you as well, Walt. In terms of human capital, Brownsville's in this really weird, unique space, and it's not just Brownsville, but the Valley, in that we've got SpaceX needing X amount of engineers, X amount of civil engineers even, right? X amount of staff to do technical work. And at the same time, we have the port that's blowing up that also has that need. And I remember Ron Garza had mentioned that the rate at which the workforce need is expanding is at a pace that we really locally can't keep up with. So just kind of with that in mindset, what would you say, or what do you think we need to do to kind of embark on that and facilitate it to where our own local people are able to kind of fulfill these roles in the next 5 to 10 years, as opposed to having to kind of open up these positions to others outside of the community?
So just quickly, you mentioned that we can't keep up with it. So I'll disagree with that comment, because I was up in Central Texas. They can't keep up with it.
Right.
The growth that they're having, and they just can't move people in fast enough. Hence, there's a reason why the San Antonios are starting to visit the Valley for these partnerships. Well, they want our workforce, because we have a lot of people here that are still very employable. So we're still able to keep up. However, that being said, it's for us to lose, right? I mean, we want to be able to retain as many as we can for these forward-thinking companies. I mean, we already have, well, I think you all get tired of me saying this, hearing this from me, but we have a project that we can't, disclose many details on that is going to require, again, more human capital that's forward-thinking, right? So we're seeing that already. Later on today, I've got a meeting with principals of the local school district to discuss expanding their CTE program specifically to address this. And CTE has now become so much more important than in previous years or previous decades. And I'll go back to when we first started working this project. We first started working SpaceX, and we were talking, and Brownsville was a very different city back then. And we're like, well, we don't have rocket scientists. That's when I discovered, Dr. Janae's back there, that we had an astrophysics program at UT, then UTB, right? So, but we're like, we don't have rocket scientists here. So what do we need to do to start developing that pipeline? And in talking to the SpaceXs of the world, they mentioned something that was very interesting, which today we take, today makes a lot of sense. Back then was like, what? They said, we need the best of the best of your students. What you need to push for in your local school districts is STEMs. We need STEMs, and when they graduate from high school, they need to be at a certain calculus level, something, so I don't remember. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not a rocket scientist either, but it was pretty high. And then on top of that, when they graduate from a university, we need them not only to be able to know all the engineering stuff, but they need to, what you said, work with their hands. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? It's like, we would like for them to have at least a basic foundation to where we can grab them and teach them, because the people that work for us are just as capable, very fitting, this has happened this weekend in Vegas, they need to be at the caliber of to work in the pit crew of an F1 racing team. And if you're familiar with F1 racing, that's the best of the best of the best in the world when it comes to engineering, when it comes to machines, when it comes to high-speed racing, troubleshooting everything in a split second, and more. Because when they said, when we launch vehicles into space, you want to talk about troubleshooting? It was a big rocket flying through the atmosphere into space, and we have to be able to troubleshoot everything like that. So that's what we need. So then that's when we started working with the school districts, the university, in trying to develop that pipeline. We have not been able to keep up. They're importing a lot of people, and that's not a bad thing. We're also working to develop a talent attraction program. Can you imagine that? Brownsville, Texas, the Rio Grande Valley, now actually working to recruit people into the valley. So that's, talk about coming a long way from, 10 years ago. So that's where we're at today.
On that note, with not kind of being ready in a sense, clearly we are, but in terms of like tourism, Walt, this question's for you, given your marketing background. How do you see space tourism evolving here, specifically in Brownsville, and what opportunities might arise in this sector? And I state that only because we've had a long time to prepare for this, but the infrequency of the schedule of launches and such, just for example today's, how do you kind of build a tourism industry around that?
It's $1 million question, isn't it? So, you obviously have specific events, right, or activities that happen, like a launch, and you draw people down here. I also know there's a Winter Texan program, right, that this region is big on. Oftentimes you can find events and existing components and marry them together, create a hybrid program where you've got folks doing that. Educational museums is another component. As you get more and more hardware that may be donated to the city or whatnot, you can prop those things up. I think the story of Brownsville, right, from its indigenous roots of Spanish colonialism and to where it's at now, and then chasing industry, that's another ad. I think when most folks do tourism marketing, there's a cultural component. You do cultural ecotourism, you do events or festivals, or you do you have these big venues. I think there's a good opportunity to continue to push it, look for opportunities. There's cities that are kind of doing it out in LA, obviously Florida. There's opportunities to do things a little different. So say if you were going to do a tourism venue and tourism marketing and create an attraction down here, right, you'd obviously have to probably try to diversify it from what you have in San Antonio with the Spanish Mission, SeaWorld, and Fiesta, Texas, right? So and if you wanted to build an attraction or whatnot, how could you create something that's kind of an and with, right? Not necessarily an either or. Kind of a roundabout way to give you an answer of it can be done. I think you just got to get creative. In this case, leveraging the crowd, kind of like we did at NASA. It's like, hey, what are y'all's ideas, right? Having kind of a regional kind of idea box, if you will. Just tell us what you're thinking, right? Sometimes those ideas may seem silly, but it'll trigger a bunch of other ideas. And then, with that is the infrastructure that you got to have when people come here. What's your hotel capacity, your rack rates, right? Accessibility to these places. Are they built in a center, right? Like a common core, like a nice venue where people want to come with fountains and attractions and, space trust systems and all this kind of thing? Or are they just kind of random, one by the airport, one off to the side of that? What do you really have a tourism district that kind of revolves around telling the story of Brownsville? I think all of that kind of comes into play. I think it's an opportunity to build into a regional-wide master plan of what that piece of the puzzle, and it is an industry, right? Tourism industry. I think the TACVB, they have programs that they talk about that all the time. So I'm going back to my tourism marketing in San Antonio days. But yeah, I think there's a great opportunity. And I think there's a lot of folks who would be pleasantly surprised when they come down here that they would love it so much that they would want to return, and you'd have repeat guests. So.
And I think that's important to consider when, we talk a lot about the space, and building an ecosystem here to support space companies or even startups at one
Right.
point. Yet we can't forget the other side to, enhance, like you talked, Gilbert, about bringing the talent that we need to have
Right.
a region or a city that is, that is attractive
Right.
to, aside from
Right.
tourism, just quality of
Exactly.
life.
So
Period.
just like your parks initiative, I think it's outstanding, right? You guys got a quality of life. I think grants that are out there, you're seeking proposals. It's outstanding. That's exactly how you do that, right? It's a reason why when people were leaving California, they were going to Boulder, Idaho, Boulder, Austin, or the Carolinas, right? The Research Triangle there, because they have a quality of lifestyle and all the talent kind of goes there.
So in that sense, I think that there's organizations across the valley that work to support that quality of life enhancement. What about industrial enhancement? How about preparing our city to support maybe those companies that are coming in, and in terms of industrial parks, industrial access, warehousing, Gilbert, in that sense, what kind of insights do you have in terms of the future of Brownsville in the developments, that we're doing here?
Well, I can't name the company, but we do have another project that is coming in to support that overall ecosystem that you were talking about, that previously they would not even open the door for us. Another huge name. We do have an industrial zone on the city's north side that we can't build fast enough. Talking about nearshoring, reshoring, the space sector, and to a certain extent, aerospace, we're getting some activity there. Brownsville right now is on the map. So, and we have real estate, but it's not real estate that's shovel ready. It's real estate that just has a bunch of cows grazing. Who would have thought back then that today we have no industrial space? We're having to now work with a lot of developers to get that space up and open as fast as possible, because those companies are asking for that today, actually yesterday. So we're assembling the pieces, and we're partnering with other communities to do the same.
Great, thank you. We're going to open it up for questions. So does anybody have any questions they would like to ask our panelists?
Be easy.
So I oftentimes think about what are the markets that you find that aren't represented as much as it comes to this exploration of inclusion in space cislunar movements, and which ones are you most excited about seeing more startups start to tackle?
I'll answer it this way. There's the technical side of getting people to places, right? So we know how to engineer rockets. We know how to get to Mars. We've been getting to Mars since the 70s. Right? But what we are struggling with is, how do we get humans to live in microgravity when our bodies were designed for gravity, right? And then all of the changes that occur. Handful of years ago, we had the twin study on the space station. One went up for a year, one went down. They did a bunch of medical experiments to see how the DNA changed, if it changed, just everything, right? It's a fantastic read. I personally think that the technology revolving around medicine is an area that is, we're pushing really, really hard. I also think it's an area that draws significant benefits right back here on Earth in terms of, I'll just call it geriatrics, right? Medicine for geriatrics, chronic diseases, things of that nature, even pharmaceuticals, all of that. But the cognition side of the equation is extremely important for a couple of reasons, right? Because when you go up there, your fluids kind of change. Your cognition starts to kind of wane. You put, say, 6 people in a can, launch them off of a missile, literally, have them spend almost a year getting to Mars, right? And then getting there, trying to walk and trying to see, and then having to get them back. I don't know about you, but just taking a 3-hour family vacation in a Toyota Highlander, that's about all I can handle, right? I could use some real-time cognitive therapy doing that. So that side of the equation, I think I mentioned, the change management and innovation having a behavioral component to it. There's this behavioral side and medical side that we're really, really working with a lot of institutions across the U.S. to do that. So it's a great question because a lot of folks don't think about that, right? They think, yeah, let's just go to Mars, right? Build a bigger rocket, right? Put some kind of magnetic gravity pull vortex engine on it. Let's just go. It's like, well, we can get there, but it's like our species, we've got to find a way to evolve, right? So that we can live permanently. So in parallel, you'll see the engineering side of hard technical engineering, and you'll see the biomedical side, biomedical engineering. And then on top of that is, I'll call it cognitive engineering, right? Medicine. So anyway, great question. Thank you for asking that.
I have a question over here. Thank you so much for everything that you all have been able to explain throughout this time. My name is Cesar de la Garza with Bronzeville PUB. Just came back from San Antonio, so hearing you had your strategy in San Antonio and the talent that we're bringing back to the Valley, I can see that from over there. Hence my move back over here. But my question's more around the significant economical, social, and environmental impacts. Obviously, having SpaceX here, you get to see a lot of different opportunities starting to grow. So what would your advice be for young entrepreneurs in the Valley looking to take advantage of the opportunities, not just created by SpaceX, but other growing industries in the area?
I'll take a stab at that one. So if look at STEM fields, that's one. Obviously, whether it's engineering, what have you. But really, like for little kids, and I've heard this from different companies, the best thing they can do is just play with Legos. Play with Legos. Have to be careful how I say this one too, but there's actually an advantage to video games. Just don't overdo it. Because the motor skills that's required to play some of these very complex video games helps. But the other one is just hands-on with Legos. Push it up to teenagers and young adults. Work on cars. I use the F1 as an example. Mm-hmm. That's what these companies are looking for. Long are the days when I was at UT, and it was ingrained in us to study, do this, which you still have to do. Now it's study and build something. Mm-hmm. That's what's going to set you apart from this stack of resumes to the smaller one and get you into not just a SpaceX, but all of these other companies that are requiring you to have a different set of skills aside from just that one engineering field that you're in.
And I would agree. So I'm going to answer this question a little bit differently, and I'm going to go a little informal and speak to my experience. So I'm a first-generation college student. My mom went to the 7th grade. Her family's from a Native American reservation out in Albuquerque. My dad, West Side, San Antonio, Las Palmas, graduated, went to the war. When we were growing up, right, we were parented by that generation. When we had big dreams, it was kind of like, hey, don't be stupid, right? Just put your head down and then go get a job, right? And I don't know how much of that is cultural or is just, my parents. I think they wanted the best for me. But I think at a young age, right, we are oftentimes not allowed to dream the crazy ideas and then to explore those things. And like Gilberto said, to get your hands on things, like going to your tío's garage and taking out his old lawnmower and just taking it apart to see how it works, right? And then trying to build a transformer with it, right? So, right, I think there's this area of, I'll call it intellectual free play, but I also challenge parents in this next generation to allow their kids to dream that way, right? And yeah, it may be a dumb idea, but when you do entrepreneurship, right, think about this rocket launching, coming down, and it's like, hey, guess what? We're going to catch it with chopsticks, that's a crazy idea. Guess what? It happened, right? So sometimes the most brilliant solutions come from those wild ideas. And I think if you map that unbridled intellectual curiosity, which is what Gilbert was alluding to, with the ability to experience and experiment, I would say what I would call a type of learning component that failure brings, right? So when we started doing this business model pivot, we had this thing we called fail fast, fail forward, fail into success, right? And it's one of the components that you see down the street where it's this rapid iteration of prototyping, launching, testing, coming back, getting the data and redoing it, right? So it's the same thing, but on a micro scale with your kids, right? And then within that, there are a ton of STEM programs in this region. And I will say NASA is probably one of the best partners when it comes to that because it's taxpayer-funded money. We go out to space, we capture all this knowledge, we got all this technology. It's our job to capture it, publish it, package it, and put it back on the street so you can use it. It's your space program, right? So I'd have your kids, even at a young age, try that kind of stuff. And for my parents, it was foreign, some of the stuff that I was interested in. They're just like, man, that's a weird kid, right? But they still love me, which is the other side of the equation is just being allowed to do that and go experiment. And I would say, if you think about a lot of our DNA, the things that our ancestors built, pyramids, right, big aqueducts, all that, all this astrology, right? So I'm a trained architect. All that stuff is in us, right? It's in there, right? And so now we just got to be okay with kids saying they want to be something different and mapping into these programs, even outside of school, right? These innovation hubs programming here, bringing in, folks like me who really enjoy working with kids and just, saying, hey, would you give up a Saturday, Sunday? We'll buy you some tacos. Like, yeah, I'm there, man. So anyway, that's a long answer. You kind of hit on an area that I'm really passionate about because I see a lot of brilliant kids get squashed because of a legacy thought process about how you're supposed to be brought up, right? And we don't need to do that anymore. This region has changed, right? You still have some of that. That's that grit that we talked about, right? That's what the competitive advantage of this region from a human capital standpoint. That's it, man. It's like, if you ask me to build something with a team of folks, I'm coming down here, right? And I'm grabbing a team, grabbing a smart person too, but to help us. So anyway, long answer, man. I love talking about that subject, but yeah. Sorry, man. I went on.
All right.
Hey,
My name's Eva Garcia. I am a regional transportation planner working for the RGV-MPO. And so I think, a lot of what you both have communicated today in terms of the community, the region, the culture, how we have that human capital infrastructure. I think I really credit BCIC for its investments in quality of life and the parks initiatives. I'm a huge supporter of that as a native. But a question for Mr. Salinas, Gilberto, it's related to transportation. So, obviously 2011 was the history you kind of initiated and the first domino fell. We're more than 10 years later, and we have significant transportation issues on SH4 leading to SpaceX and SH48 for different industrial reasons. So I'm trying to be proactive as a regional transportation planner. We're talking about the next decade. We're talking about, I love that the South Texas Space Commission and overall the Texas space idea. So knowing that we're growing, knowing that we're attracting more people to live and play in the region, what can we do as transportation professionals to be proactive for the industrial area in North Brownsville that you talked about and other areas that we're seeing the job sector growth change? And I'm a disruptor. I like to believe I'm a disruptor in transportation. I believe in public transportation. So ultimately, I'd like to kind of hand it over to see what can we do better as regional transportation planners to prepare for the space and aerospace industry.
That's just planning for major investment in infrastructure. So short answer, there is There's a lot of effort right now in upgrading Boca Chica or State Highway 4 going down to the Boca Chica Beach site. So has been worked on and is continuing to, a lot of efforts going into that with several local and regional entities. So it just can't happen fast enough. That project just grew faster than all of us thought. And that's, you got the heavy truck traffic. It's a state highway, but that's in addition to all the tourists. I mean, that's the difference between us and like Cape Canaveral. Cape Canaveral, you're still 10 miles out before you can actually touch a rocket. Here, you just put your hand out the window, you can touch it, right?
Literally.
Or stand on a sand dune and, just see it right there. So, so there's work being done with that. Now, taking a step back and looking at, my wife is from Houston, so we still go to Houston, not as much as we used to, back in the late 90s. And I remember there was Beltway 8, if you're not familiar with Houston, that's, I don't know, their third loop. There's now another loop after that. Yeah. So Beltway 8, and I remember when they built it, that was back then, I was like, man, these planners in this city are not that smart. There's nothing out there. There was absolutely nothing. Now, nombre, it's
right. Highway 99
filled in.
Yeah.
And now you got another loop, Highway 99. Right. So you're talking about 20-some years later, right? So that's where we're at right now. What we could do better is from a community standpoint and leadership standpoint, not to be short-sighted. Looking 20, 30 years out, kind of like what Houston did with that Beltway 8 example. Being able to plan for those. And that's happening already, but again, just not fast enough. And then we start getting into the political side. Well, we need funding for that. That also can't happen fast enough. We're just not as big as a Houston or a Dallas that gets a lion's share. So that's what we're working on. What was the other part of the question? Or was that it on the transportation side?
I think like innovative perspective, like a key scenario has
Yeah.
public transportation. Obviously, and we're thinking about the RG as a metro area.
Yeah.
So how do we improve transportation?
Yeah. Yeah, and it goes back to the planning. At the end of the day, it goes back to funding, having the political clout to give us the funding that we need, and having, not that we do not have good connectivity, but better connectivity between the Brownsville and the McAllen, really increasing that, and beyond that as well. Because now, suddenly, the Boca Chica Beach area, as well as South Padre Island, have become huge hotspots where it's not growing organically anymore like it was now. It's just on steroids. So we're just having to catch up with that.
Yeah. I'll add just a little bit to it, not to that depth. So one of my first projects out of college was doing the land use case study for the Disney Aulani Resort on Oahu, Honolulu, if anybody's been to the Disney Resort. So we kind of laid everything out for the state and just kind of showed them how when they brought in a resort, which at the time they were talking to a different couple of folks, how they could show them kind of like a shopping center, how they could anchor certain assets and build that. From an urban planning perspective, when I was the master planner at the Johnson Space Center, one of the things that we always did is we knew we weren't the decision makers. It was our job to continuously communicate to the decision makers, provide scenario planning components with really simple, strong visuals, right? Because oftentimes as a planner, you're in the weeds, you're talking about all these components, all the way down to soil samples, right? And as a decision maker, they're looking at some higher level things. So, understanding that one of the roles is to kind of lead your leaders, so to speak, by constantly refreshing things, giving them a good data set to work from so that when the politics are right, they can just go grab that right and they're informed in the loop. If I'm a leader and I'm responsible for that kind of stuff, if I don't know until the last minute, then it's not good. There's a philosophy of when's the best time to plant a shade tree. It was 15 years ago, right? But oftentimes you don't get the sapling until 10 years later. But at least you know where you're going to put it. You understand what the sun is going to do. How in a couple of years it's going to grow and what it's going to do to your grass and all that. So just kind of my perspective was I always viewed my role as that side of the equation. And then it helped me, because it can be frustrating, because on the master planning side, we're looking, 5, 10, 15, 20 years out, there's some things that you need to do immediately. But if you kind of reframe, what your work is and how you support your leadership team like Gilberto and all that, I think that's a good way to approach it. You're welcome.
Hello, my name is Alicia Villarreal. I'm a real estate broker locally here in Brownsville. And my question, of course, is related to real estate. With a SpaceX driving innovation and growth in the Brownsville area, how soon do you think we will start seeing a significant impact on the real estate? And I'm talking about residential and rental. Do you think that Brownsville is prepared for the growing already with what is happening and that in the housing market?
Not entirely prepared. It's one of those things where we can't build houses fast enough as well. Again, we're a city that's organically grown over the years to now it's like we're starting to, we have to keep up. And we've already heard it from my leadership telling us that, hey, people are complaining that their valuations are going up. They're paying more in taxes, to which my response is, well, their house is valued more, That's not a bad thing either, right? They can make a lot of money if they sell it. And when it comes to rentals, you're starting to see a lot of apartment complexes being built out there because of what's happening down here. And these are investors that are coming in from other parts of the United States, as well as Mexican investment. And I know, and again, I can't speak on behalf of SpaceX, but I know that they have a waiting list of people that are just looking for housing. And geographically, what's interesting is to get to SpaceX, unless you're on the hovercraft, right? To get to SpaceX, there's only one way to get there, and you have to go to Brownsville. And like from my office right here, I'm a quarter of a mile away from the river. To get to a SpaceX, it's 45 minutes up to an hour sometimes, just because you have to cross town, right? So the closest you can be is on the eastern part of town. So that's where you're starting to see a lot of activity out there as well. So there's some SpaceXers that live as far away as Harlingen. Harlingen is starting to see that impact or that effect as well. So not so great news. Valuation that I expect are going to continue to go up slightly more. And that's not a super bad thing. But that means there's entrepreneurs in here, right? This is what this is. That means there's opportunities out there. He just mentioned like 3, 4 business ideas, right? A little while ago. On the real estate side, I mean, if I had some kind of money, I would be putting money into real estate in Brownsville and the surrounding areas. That was a softball for the entrepreneurs in here.
And we have one final question.
Hi, Blanca Davila with UTRGV. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your insights Unplugged. In terms of workforce development, you've touched on entrepreneurship, transportation, and the real estate market. What type of recommendations would you have for higher ed institutions locally here, like UTRGV, to capitalize on upskilling and reskilling our local workforce to ensure that they tap into the space industry?
Thank you, Blanca. The university's already doing that, and that started way back when. The Stargate, Project Stargate, Dr. Janae was a huge part of that. Dr. Julia Garcia, in making sure that there was obviously I'm a Longhorn, right? That there was a UT flag planted out at in proximity to the SpaceX site, to start building that relationship between private sector industry, which in this case was space, and higher education, which was UT Brownsville at the time, now UTRGV. That facility is still there. Now it's engulfed by the SpaceX. So there's a pipeline there already. If anything more needs to be done, it's just increasing your capacity. Maybe on the transportation side, making it a little easier for some of our students to have access, whether it's out there or students from here going to the Upper Valley or vice versa. So that's happening already. In the school districts, I'd say, I'm going to meet with BISD later today, right? But BISD is not the only school district in the immediate area. We're definitely, and I'm sure that, companies here would be open to other school districts, not just in Cameron County, but the Upper Valley as well, starting that process early on. So I think UTRGV doing a great job. This facility, the partnership with BCIC is also a testament to that. But now looking at how to take it to the next level. And again, I have to be careful what I say, right, because of what we do. But there's other universities that are looking at the Valley because of what we have going on here. Linda, take it easy. There's other universities that are looking to come into the area, right? So we have to be mindful about that, and that's not a bad thing either,
Definitely not a bad
ya
thing.
me van a correr de
We
aquí,
love
ya.
competition, so go for it.